Good early morning. It is now Thursday, 1:54 a.m. on July the 7th. And I did an earlier video just after news came out that the Georgia Guidestones had been damaged in an explosion. And I did that this morning. And then I did another one earlier this early morning, late evening. That was interrupted by a phone call, so I deleted it. And I'm doing it again now. And I'm targeting this specifically towards people who probably didn't know that the Georgia Guidestones even existed, because this is the stuff of Alex Jones' Prison Planet variety for a lot of people. They didn't, the mainstream media basically gave the Guidestones zero coverage. They'd been around for, I guess, 40 plus years. They appeared suddenly, I think it was in March of 1980. Construction on them had started in 1979, but with no fanfare. And in this COVID era, because of 10 commandments that are written on the stones, I'll call them commandments, call them guides, call them directives, call them whatever you want, because of the number one commandment, or whatever you want to call it, was to maintain humanity under 500 million. And with everything going on in the world, a lot of people said, oh, this is proof, or this is evidence that there's a clandestine plan to depopulate the planet. And this would be mentioned to people, and no one had ever heard of these Guidestones before. And now, with them having been initially first damaged in an explosion, and now apparently, reportedly, they have been completely demolished. So the Georgia Guidestones are no more. I find it somewhat ironic that it takes the destruction of something to open people's eyes to that thing's very existence. For 40 years, a lot of people didn't even know these things existed. And now they'll only acknowledge it, given that the news has now covered it and told them that they have been destroyed. I've known about them since sometime around the year 2000, 2001. So for 20 odd years, I've known that the Georgia Guidestones existed. And the only reason I know that they exist is because of the internet. When the internet was brand new, or newish, I first started surfing the internet, back in around 1996, I think, with a 9600 baud rate modem, dial-up connection. And there was all kinds of information out there that purported to be the real truth, and people would search the internet and you could find out all strange and unusual facts, but you had to be discerning, because some could be true, some could be false. I learned a lot of things that I didn't know, because when you watch the news, if you rely on the news to be informed, you are told what's important to those who are programming the news. And if they don't deem it important, it's one of the challenges of this era, this world that we live in, is who determines what is important and what isn't. And the news, I feel, nowadays, it tells you what to think about and even how to feel about it. Typically, they only present one side of the narrative, and they tell people what to think and how to feel. And I don't like that. I like to form my own opinions. And so, anyway, the Georgia Guidestones. What do I know about them? What I learned about them way back in 2000 ish, 20 odd years ago, was that a gentleman by the name of R.C. Christian approached a monument company in the town of Elberton, Georgia, and commissioned them to build a monument that has been likened to Stonehenge in England. Sometimes the Guidestones were referred to as America's Stonehenge. These were 5 stones standing upright. There were 4 on the outside, 1 in the middle, and a capstone on top. Picture a kid playing with blocks. And the 4 outer stones had 10 guiding principles written on them, and they were written in 8 different languages: English, Chinese, Hebrew. I'll cover that in a little bit. And as well, they said something to the effect of, let these stones be a guide, or let these be a guide stones to an age of reason, or words very similar effect. And that was written in 4 languages, including Babylonian cuneiform and Sanskrit, ancient languages, Egyptian hieroglyphics. And as I say, they basically, no one was paying attention. This wasn't being covered on the news. 20 odd years later, stories started to appear about them on the internet, and that opened some people's eyes to them. And they're freaky. They're astronomically aligned. There was a slit cut into the capstone on top, and I believe it tracked the North Star. All kinds of mathematical and astronomical precision was involved. So what happened was, in 1979, this gentleman, going under the pseudonym of R.C. Christian, approached this monument company that made granite monuments, headstones, and things of that nature, and wanted these Guidestones built. The story is that the company was not inclined to take the contract. It was just a little too weird, for lack of a better word, a little too strange. So in quoting for the job, and I forget, it's been too many years since I read all of this stuff, but I don't remember the exact details, but they quoted 2, 3, 4 times what the job should cost, because in hopes that never mind. But apparently this R.C. Christian said, no problem, here are the blueprints, very detailed, here's the money. And so they were built. I forget the exact details on the land on which they were built, but as I recall, just going off memory, a farmer sold them the land, and then this consortium of clandestine individuals then leased back the land to allow the farmer for his cattle to graze on it. Trent Dabbs is asking me if I've seen the video. I've seen 2 videos. One video shows the actual explosion, just a big, no sound. So you just see a big explosion. And then there's a second video that purports to be a car that fled the scene shortly thereafter. My big question with these stones is, who built them? Who was R.C. Christian? That's a pseudonym. That's anonymous. We don't know. And who are the individuals behind backing R.C. Christian? Because according to all the reports from people who dealt with this anonymous individual, he claimed that he was supported by a group of well-endowed, wealthy Americans. And that's all we know. And whoever they were, they had enough wealth and enough influence. Everyone who met R.C. Christian, there's one gentleman who's quoted now in the press from an article back in 2013 saying that he knows who he is, but he vowed he would never divulge the man's identity. And he is holding to his promise. I don't even know if that gentleman is still alive who made that claim. Just because he says he knows the identity doesn't mean he does. But it was a significant monument, even though people have never heard of it. Too many people have never heard of it and didn't believe it was real. It's ironic. It took the destruction of something for people to acknowledge, oh my goodness, this thing really did exist. Now, what did the Guidestones say? I'm going to read each of the guiding principles and that were engraved on them, again in 8 different languages. The 8 languages were English, Spanish, Swahili, Hindi, Hebrew, Arabic, traditional Chinese, and Russian. And number 1, they're numbered 1 to 10. Number 1, maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Right now on the planet, according to everything you can find out there, we are over 7.9 and approaching 8 billion people on this planet. And that number grows by roughly 200,000 each and every day. And that's births subtracted with deaths subtracted out. So that is net growth, 200,000 more mouths to feed on the planet every day than the day previous. So the number 1 guideline is maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Number 2 is guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity, which to many people, myself included, that reeks of something called eugenics, which was a pseudoscience that came out in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and reached something of a culmination during the Nazi era when they were promoting this idea of a master race. And basically it's taking Darwinian theories of evolution and, trying to engineer humanity so that breeding, to use a very cold term, only takes place between those with the most desirable traits. So number 2, guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. Number 3, unite humanity with a living new language. Number 4, rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason. 5, protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. Number 6, let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court. Avoid petty laws and useless officials is number 7. Number 8, balance personal rights with social duties. Number 9, prize truth, beauty, love, seeking harmony with the infinite. And number 10, be not a cancer on the earth, leave room for nature, leave room for nature. They make those words were written twice. Be not a cancer on the earth, and then twice written, leave room for nature. Commentary on each one of these points we're the first, most obvious, and the biggest one, and one that's been shared a lot during this COVID era, is this idea of maintaining humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. How are you going to manage that? That's a scary notion. Right now, how do people reproduce? It's random, in a sense. It's random in the sense that there's no planning, there's no management of it. And people get married, people engage in sexual relations, and children are born. Bang. There's no power, there's no structure guiding it. It just happens. Again, number 2, guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. Sounds like you're breeding horses. Is that the way we view humanity? I don't. Unite humanity with a living new language. Basically advocating that all of humanity have just one language. Those familiar with the Bible will know the story of the Tower of Babel, or Babel, if you prefer that pronunciation. Number 4, rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason. Don't we try and do that now? Human beings, we're not machines. Human beings are emotional creatures. It's part of our makeup. And we do try to rule our passions or our behavior with tempered reason to varying degrees of success. Um, Number five, protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. Well, do we not try to do that right now? Um, do we not try to protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts? Or is anyone out there advocating that we have unfair laws and unjust courts? Seems a little ridiculous to me. Uh, Here's one that I find contradictory. It says, let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court. Much has been made over the fact that some people believe that there's this new world order, globalist agenda behind what's been going on in the world for at least the past 2 years, and many will say it's been going on far longer than that, for decades. Um, and if you're going to have a situation where you're maintaining humanity under 500 million, well, that would imply that there would have to be global control. There would have to be the top of the pyramid, so to speak, would have to be those. A mechanism would have to be put in place to enforce population measures on each and every individual country. Because look at the situation in the world right now. You have China and India both have in and around 1.4, 1.5 billion people each, up around 3 billion, and that's just two countries. Would they be left to rule themselves internally? I consider that a contradiction. And I'll leave the rest alone, avoid petty laws and useless officials. Strikes me that this list they wanted to come up with the number 10, so they had to, fill it in. Number 9, prize truth, beauty, love, seeking harmony with the infinite. There is one comment I will make, and that's with respect to the manner in which they were built. It was done in the shadows. It was done clandestinely. One of the biggest problems in the world today, in my view, is that too much happens behind the curtain that people don't know about. And, when the World Economic Forum and similar type groups meet, just like the Guidestones are real, the Bilderberger group is an actual group. It's real. They meet secretly, clandestinely. And so, because of their lack of willing to let the light in, because they operate in the shadows and the darkness, people are left to guess what it is being discussed when the doors are closed and the cameras and mics are all off, and they're in the dark shadows. What are they discussing? Why won't they discuss it openly? Why won't they hold this in an open forum? And I will suggest to you, because light and dark are concepts that have been around for millennia. The good operates in the light and the evil operates in the dark. And these Guidestones were built in the darkness. And if the individuals who financed their construction had the courage of their conviction, they should have come forward and said, this is what we're doing, this is what we're planning. Some have suggested that the monument was built to survive a cataclysm like a nuclear war or something like that, where humanity was pretty much destroyed and only a few people remained. And then these Guidestones were set up like a Rosetta Stone. If you're not familiar with the Rosetta Stone, that's the, I don't know all the details on it, but the Rosetta Stone was found, I believe, in Egypt, and it found the same piece of writing had been written in, I believe it was modern Greek, ancient Greek, and in Egyptian hieroglyphics. And it was the discovery of this Rosetta Stone that enabled Egyptologists to decipher hieroglyphs, and to finally be able to read Egyptian hieroglyphs. And so by writing it in 8 different world languages, if any one of those 8 languages were to survive after a cataclysm, that the message would get through. Um, but there's a biblical aspect to this. I talked about the Tower of Babel, where humanity tried to build ourselves up to the level of gods, and God said, no, no, no. And you don't have to be biblical. You can go back to Greek mythology and the story of Icarus. Icarus wanted to fly up and join with the gods, so he made wings out of wax, and then he flew, and he got too close to the sun. The wings, being made of wax, they melted, and he crashed. When mankind, the message being, whether you want to take it allegorically, as in the case of Icarus, or if you want to take a fundamentalist, literalist interpretation of the Bible with the Tower of Babel. And it's when humanity tries to reach the level of gods, bad things happen. There is a gentleman, and I can't remember his name, but he's with the World Economic Forum, and he is one of Klaus Schwab's key advisors. I forget his name, and I don't want to butcher it, but he is now, can be seen on YouTube right here with videos talking about the fact I'm not going to call it a fact because I consider it fiction, but he is saying that we've reached a point now in human history where humanity, that we are no more than biological machines, and that we are completely hackable, and that the notion of a soul and the notion of human rights, God-given rights, that these are anachronistic to our new modern enlightened age. I think this is pure evil. But it's in certain quarters, this kind of thinking, this kind of talk gets a lot of play. I would invite anyone to go on to the Government of Canada page on the web. It's called Horizons Canada. And they are speculating openly, planning for what they are referring to as biodigital convergence. Another term you'll hear for this is transhumanism. And it's basically merging the digital world with the biological. So they portray a scenario where we're basically hooked up to computers, where our dreams can be downloaded. And if you digitalize an individual's dreams, well, then if someone can hack into that program, they could know what you're dreaming about. However, of course, it's always presented in the most glowing light that, would allow, how many times do you wake up and you only have a hint, sense of what a dream was about, but there's a feeling around it and you feel really good and you would love to revisit that dream. Well, imagine being able to download it and watch what you were dreaming. It sounds good. Sounds good, but what happens in practice versus what is imagined can be divergently different. Now, Trent Dabbs is saying it was probably some rich old guy and he didn't want people to know it was him. One of the speculations is made that it was Ted Turner, who used to own CNN, and apparently, he's been big on population control, big on environmental issues. Another theory punted with respect to who was behind it is due to the name being R.C. Christian. Some have postulated that it's Masonic order, sometimes referred to as the Rosicrucians, or the Society of the Rose and Cross. And so they think R.C. Christian is a play on Rosicrucian. And they're, as I say, a Masonic type order that has basically infiltrated a number of supposed churches. I belong to a church that will not allow members to belong to the Masons, because the Masons is another organization, fraternal order, that operates in the shadows, in the darkness, in secret. And if you're a Christian, read your Bible. All that is hidden will be revealed. But some human beings like to keep things in the shadow and the darkness, out of the light. And what's going to happen now? I don't know. The world's going, I'll say it, batshit crazy. Pardon, I don't like to swear, but it happens. We've got monkeypox now. We're up to 7,100, 7,200 identified cases. What's caused this sudden outbreak of this pathogen, and what I find curious when it comes to monkeypox, is the fact that when COVID came out, they said, well, this is novel, this is new, we don't know anything about it. And so every time they were wrong, people go, well, you got to forget, that's excusable. We're learning as we go. In terms of Canada, when it started happening in January, February, our chief medical health officer said, no, we're not going to have people quarantine, even if they're coming from a hotspot like Wuhan or Italy. We're not going to have them quarantine because the chance of human transmission is incredibly low. And it's like, well, wait a minute, I thought it was novel. You didn't know about it. And yet you're making decisions like you're an authority on this novel virus. And then, so many retrospective mistakes with hindsight, but people were willing to forgive. They said, well, it's a novel virus. Now contrast that with what's happening now with monkeypox, and we're being told that, oh, well, this is a disease that's been around for, I think, 50 odd years. It's well known, et cetera, et cetera. And yet we still don't know anything about it. You read articles in the mainstream press, and one article will have an expert postulating that monkeypox is an airborne aerosol virus, the same as COVID. And then you'll have another expert saying, no, it's not airborne. It doesn't transmit via aerosols. It only transmits between close contact. There's a study just came out in preprint, so it hasn't gone through the peer review process, but they're finding fomite. They're finding that the virus can live on surfaces. Can it transmit versus surfaces? We don't know. So there's so much that is unknown. I have my views, I have my opinions. The unfortunate thing is I'm not an expert. Well, that's fortunate or unfortunate, doesn't matter. Either way, it's just a simple fact that I don't have degrees in virology, immunology, infectious disease, or any other scientific, any other area of medical science. With that being said, I've taken some university level courses in science, so I don't consider myself illiterate on matters of science. I can read, and what I like to do is look. I understand that when it comes to science, especially when things are new, that you will have strong opinions, and quite often there'll be differing opinions. And I find it annoying that the media sifts through the opinions and they pick the one they like. I don't know who they are, but there was an article just the other day in Global News, mainstream media, saying that the focus had to be, for monkeypox, that the focus had to be on a mass vaccination campaign in Africa. And that They quoted 3 experts in their article, but they did not look at the other side. They didn't seek out any experts who have a contrary opinion. So they presented one opinion as fact and ignore the other side of the equation, which that's unethical journalism. And we've been living through that throughout the entire past 2 years and even longer than that. Trent says it's their science now and uses a dollar sign for the word science. One thing I will talk about in terms of the Georgia Guidestones and their number one guiding principle, that to maintain humanity under 500 million, I would invite anyone listening to me to do some research and find out what is the maximum sustainable population, human population, that this planet can have. And how many people can the planet Earth sustain? Just type that into a search engine and see what you find. What I have found in doing those searches is that the number is somewhere around 2 billion. The University of Texas did a study on it, and they put the number at 1.9 billion. Now the question will be reasonably asked, well, if we are living on a planet that can only sustain 1.92 billion, how is it possible then that we have 8 billion now? And the reason they say that we can have 8 billion now is because they contend that the Earth had, past tense of the verb, had massive reserves, and that those reserves have now been largely depleted. We have soil degradation, clean water supplies are diminishing, and the analogy I would use is, imagine you have a bank account with $1 million in it, and you're living a very extravagant lifestyle that's costing $100,000 a year, and you're getting interest income. But as you take out 100,000 each year, that stockpile, that bank account, is going to dwindle until it's eventually empty. The contention is that the Earth, on an annual basis, there's enough renewable water, food, energy, resources that the Earth produces these only enough to support 1.92 billion people. What are we seeing now in my home province of London, Ontario? The world's largest cricket food processing plant has been just built, and it's in CTV, CBC, Global, maybe even the Americans have picked it up, I don't know. But it's mainstream news that London, Ontario now has the world's largest insect or cricket food processing plant in the world. And why? Is the market screaming for insect-based proteins? Now, the way this factory or facility came into existence is that the creators of it, the builders of it, the brains behind it, won an award from the Clinton Foundation. And it's also received heavy investment, I imagine, from entities like BlackRock and other hedge funds. And what I see happening is that, no, the market right now, the marketplace is not demanding cricket-based protein food, but the powers behind the creation of this plant, are they trying to create, I'll leave it as a question, are they trying to create the conditions that will make this business viable? I'll leave that as an open question. Trent is saying again, the number is way too low on the Guidestones. 500 million is way too low? I don't know. I mean, it's pure evil to take 8 billion people and reduce it to 2 billion or 500 million. The question of as to how many people this planet can sustain, I think it can sustain far more than we have right now. It's my non-expert opinion. But I don't get invited to the World Economic Forum. I don't get to hear what's being discussed or to offer my thoughts when they close the doors, turn off the mics, and shut down the cameras. So I would love to hear what's being discussed. I would love to chime in. I now have Christina saying timing is everything. I'd like to know what you mean by that with respect to the Georgia Guidestones being destroyed. These stones are under 24-hour a day, 7-day a week surveillance, have been for a number of years because they have been vandalized, I believe primarily spray painted in the past. How could someone get that the amount of explosive needed to destroy granite? I thought diamonds were tougher than granite. I did some reading. Apparently, no. Granite's even harder than diamonds. And there's only quartzine or quartzine is the only rock that's more durable, harder. So how much explosive was needed to blow apart that one stone? There's one, basically, of the 4 outer stones, one looked like it was cracked in half and reduced to big, large, 2 or 3 big, large chunks and a bit of rubble. Yeah, Christine is saying to me, read comments above. I'm trying. But I don't see any previous comments from you, as Trent is saying. And so I don't know what you're referring to with respect to the timing. But the question I have is, how can someone get enough explosives onto the site without being seen by closed circuit television? Open question. And then when I saw the video and the drone footage of the aftermath, what existed after, obviously I would assume the pictures weren't detailed enough to let me know whether the remaining stones, how badly damaged they were. But did it really necessitate taking the whole thing down? Could not something have been done? Could not a replacement stone have been built? Don't know if this RC Christian, apparently, according to the individual who met him, who says he won't divulge his identity. I saw an interview with him. And he was saying that the gentleman was in his 70s. That was his guess. So he highly doubted that he was still alive. He didn't say it was impossible, but he said if he was alive, he would be incredibly old right now, like 110. So maybe it's a question of finance, that they couldn't repair them. I have no idea. It just seems curious that they had to tear the whole thing down. Trent Dabbs is saying, but some people are saying it was a lightning bolt. I don't know about that. I don't see how a lightning bolt could tear granite apart. I don't know. Outside of my depth, I know a lightning bolt will down a tree and set it on fire, but could it absolutely destroy concrete? What I found surprising is that an explosion strong enough to destroy that one column, that one guidestone, that the other 3, from what I could see, didn't appear to have suffered a great deal of damage, and maybe none at all. Bill Gates is a Bond violin. Did you mean to write violin? Anyway, I've yammered on enough, 40 odd minutes. And Trent saying lightning bolts are crazy. So uh, I thought, a Bond villain, I think, is better than Bond violin. I mean, I could talk about Bill Gates, corporate raider, uh, unethical business practices, and now we're supposed to believe that the leopard has changed his spots. He's done a wonderful marketing campaign. He's now the single largest owner of farmland in the United States. On the other hand, even though he's the single largest owner of farmland in the United States, the amount of farmland he owns as a percentage of the total arable farmland in the U.S. is still a tiny fraction. But Trent's laughing and saying, I can't spell. Punk My Video is saying the real villain is Klaus Schwab. I'm no fan of Klaus Schwab. I'm no fan of that advisor he has, that young kid who's talking about humanity being hackable machines, that the idea of a soul and human rights and inalienable God-given rights, that these are antiquated and anachronisms that have no place in the modern world. If this kind of thinking takes hold, we're heading to a dark place. I have my faith to fall back on. I do not believe that this wondrous creation just happened by accident, by natural selection, random mutations. I cannot accept that. Glad to hear you also have faith, Christina. Faith is everything. I will talk a bit about that because it's one of my favorite topics, and that is creation. Now, the scientific crowd, for lack of a better word, will propose the Big Bang Theory. And the Big Bang Theory, as I understand it, says that all of the sum total of all the energy and matter in the universe at the dawn of time was contained within a tiny little speck, no bigger than a quark. And that then an explosion took place. Energy, matter, everything's just floating around, blah, 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 blah. And then out of this total chaotic disorder, order started to happen. And then somehow, poof, pixie dust or something, life formed, microscopic life, single-celled, maybe bacteria or whatever. And then random mutations occurred. And now you have us, if you will, as the pinnacle of this evolutionary process. That's what we're told is science. Now, can they prove it? Is it provable? The best science is provable science, and it's provable numerous times. It can be replicated. Well, Louis Pasteur, back in the 1800s, tried to prove this idea that life could just spring out of nothing, had been around. Some refer to it as spontaneous generation. So it's not a new theory. And he tried to prove that it was possible, but what he found, what his experiments found, is that only life can create life. There is no spontaneous generation at all. So that kind of blew away this evolutionary theory that Darwin had put forward, that life just came from nothing, that we crawled out of the ooze because there has to be a first mover. And so if there's no life, then life can't be created. And then a new theory got put out, and it's referred to as abio or abio, spelled A-B-I-O, abiogenesis. And this theory, I love this theory because it's is that the theory is that the conditions necessary for life to come into being from nothing only existed for a fixed period of time, sometime after the Big Bang. So sometime billions of years ago. the conditions necessary for life to form out of lifeless matter, that they existed, but it was only for a fixed period of time and then it ended. And the reason I love this theory is because you can't prove it, you can't disprove it, because if you say to someone, well, prove that, they say, well, those conditions that were necessary, they don't exist anymore. We don't even know what those conditions were. What a wonderful theory. So you basically have to accept it on blind faith. But I thought blind faith was the purvey of religion, belief in the unknown or in the unseen. And so it's more than a little bit curious. The scientific crowd, at the core crux of their belief system, it relies on blind faith. Now, science, Trent is saying, I believe in science and religion. Science is a human endeavor. So I don't believe in science any more than I believe in engineering. I mean, it's not a belief, it's a thing. It's nothing to invest in. Science is a process of investigation and involves evolving levels of proof. And we'll hear the term often that the science is settled. And science is sometimes settled. Science can be settled. An example would be the freezing point of water. We know that it's 0 degrees centigrade. And it's 0 degrees centigrade in Canada. It's 0 degrees centigrade in the United States, in Venezuela, in Africa, in Australia, in New Zealand. Doesn't matter where, doesn't matter when. The freezing point of water is always 0 degrees Celsius, 0 centigrade. Settled science. Another one, science that is settled is the Earth orbits the sun, and it takes 365 and a quarter days for it to complete that circuit, that orbit around the sun. Settled. 365 and a quarter, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, and it'll be 365 and a quarter days next year, 10 years, 10,000 years. Settled science. Doesn't change. When someone says to me the science is evolving, well, then it's not settled. So someone will tell me that, well, based on what we know right now, the science is settled and this scientific formula is safe and effective. And I said, well, where's the data from 5 years from now? Well, we don't have it yet, but we're guessing. And they'll call it settled science. So I'm treading up to the line, so I better stop now. Have a good night, everyone. God bless. We'll see what happens with these Georgia Guidestones. I'm curious as to whether it's getting, how much play it's getting on the mainstream media. I'm wondering if it's been on the nightly news, because I don't watch the nightly news. I figure out what I want to know about and I seek it out. So I don't rely on media programming to tell me what's important. I decide for myself, and then I decide for myself how I feel about it and what I think about it. So good night. God bless. Have a great rest of the week.